All right, for more on the anger being stoked, let's turn to Melissa Harris-Lacewell, Associate Professor of Politics and African American Studies at Princeton University. Good evening, Professor.
Hi, how are you?
The spontaneous nature of these protests might not be at all spontaneous. That may be faked, and the money and the organizing power behind them are corporate and Republican, and yes, they even come from Glenn Beck. But that does not mean that the people are not real and that their anger is any less palpable. What are you seeing going on here societally?
Okay, so I need you to indulge my professorial nerd side just a little bit here, because I actually think that there's a bit of an answer in the research. So there's some terrific research around the authoritarian dynamic. And what it tells us through a study of political psychology is that there's these notions of racial, moral, and political intolerance. And they're actually all linked by an authoritarian dynamic. That's actually the name of a terrific book by Karen Stenner, The Authoritarian Dynamic. And what it tells us is that, you know, ordinary people who normally feel sort of okay walking through their days through the political world can get riled up by change and by disagreement in public opinion. And in fact, the more they think the world is changing and the more they think there's a lot of disagreement and anxiety, the more stressed out they become and the more likely they are to be authoritarian and intolerant in their political behavior. And I think that what we've seen here is a very careful and a very destructive stoking of that authoritarian dynamic, you know, by the GOP, by these corporate interests. But the folks on the ground are feeling very real anxiety about where our country's going.
Yeah, John Dean touched on a lot of that research that you referred to in his book, I guess about 4 years ago, Conservatives Without Conscience, which is just a stunner. It separates a whole group of people from the idea of the Republican Party or even the conservative movement. It is that exact term you used, authoritarianism. What I'm fascinated by is that the protesters in Tampa were happy enough to say, yeah, well, we were told by the Republican Party to come out here, and the rest of us are all members of this Glenn Beck club. The guy in Connecticut did not even bother to wear a different shirt other than the one that said which healthcare firm, which industry part he was associated with. The woman in Wisconsin who'd been the Republican county vice chair blatantly lying about her connections. Is this a symptom of this, that people are not even trying to hide the puppet strings?
Maybe. It could also be true that instead of my professorial hat, what I need is my mommy hat. And I have a 7-year-old, and she tells me that sometimes it's just opposite day. And so whatever you say, it's actually the opposite thing is true. So if you're saying that there are death panels, what you actually mean is that we currently have a healthcare system where people are dying because of lack of care. If you say I'm an ordinary American, what you really mean is I'm actually here at the behest of corporate interest. You know, so it could be that it's simply opposite day for the conservative movement, and if you are saying the other guy is the bad guy, in fact, it may just be a projection of your own anxieties.
So the idea that the protesters might be unaware that they're shilling for the coldest kind of corporate entity that there could be, it's not that they don't know this, or they might feel they're being used. You tie all this together, and suddenly the corporation is the authoritarian leader in this equation?
Well, no, it could be that it's both, right? So you always want to expect that in a crowd full of people shouting, there's some folks there who are just going to be against anything Democrats want. There's some folks there working out of a kind of psychological anxiety of authoritarianism. There's some folks there who have very real corporate and job interests in this stuff. And there's some folks who are so confused by all of this policy and by all of this disagreement that they're grasping for something to understand, and sometimes that's just the status quo. So what we really need is somebody's got to call will.i.am, and he's got to do a remix of Yes We Can, so we can get the positive emotions going again.
Yeah, and you can often tell these people at the protesters because they're the ones wearing the shirts that read Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. Melissa Harris-Lacewell of Princeton, thank you again. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, you too.